recently with Corbyn.
Xi Jinping,
Abdullah Öcalan.
And the Macron sort of style of leadership, or
Putin's propaganda station.
looking at the idea of good leadership.
And the problem is at the moment we're not having it.
and we have to think about our leaders and how we choose them. I mean, Xi Jinping has concentrated power at a truly astonishing rate. At the start of this process, people joked about him being chairman of everything. And now we're in a position where official media have referred to him not only as wise leader, but even as my personal favourite, General Secretary of People's Feelings. It's quite an impressive reach, isn't it? So no wonder Trump's feeling a bit jealous. I mean, this is really remarkable because China had prided itself on at least seeming like a sort of technocracy. It kind of goes back to the 60s and the age of ideology. Chairman Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, partly from ideological zeal, partly to extend and shore up his already incredible power. And it was absolutely devastating, especially actually to the political elite. So if you look at Xi Jinping's own history, his father was horribly persecuted, his half-sister died, he spent years toiling away in the countryside. This was not an unusual experience. And they were all so scarred that in the aftermath, they decided that they had to cage power. You just couldn't have one person at the centre with this much authority. So they institutionalised power, they collectivised power, they introduced all these things like retirement ages and term limits, which is, of course, the thing that Xi has just scrapped for himself. There was a vote within the party which was something like 3,600 in favour and 2 very brave souls against. So you've gone from the age where you had Hu Jintao, the world's most boring leader, probably deliberately boring, and this generation of red engineers talking about technocracy and the scientific theory of development, to an era in which you have Xi Jinping thought, which is a body of theory explicitly identified as being about one man who's in charge indefinitely now. But I think the really key thing to remember is that this is not, as it's sometimes been portrayed, about Xi Jinping single-handedly sort of transforming this system. The point is that the elite clearly had made this collective decision that the system was not sustainable, that the kind of reforms that were needed, both for China's long-term sustainability and, of course, the sustainability of Communist Party rule, depended on having a more powerful figure at the centre who could force these changes through. Now, I don't think they anticipated quite how far and how fast he'd take that, and I'm pretty sure a lot of them are regretting it now, but I think it was a collective decision. It couldn't have been done by one person. And I think there is also a lot of genuine public enthusiasm for it. There's a lot of people who are very disturbed, but there are also a lot of people who are buying into this, and they say, well, we like this strong leadership. And even in a system where nobody gets to vote, you still need some level of buy-in from the people. So what does this mean for us? I think it shows us that it's really not just about leaders, but about systems and about the people around them, whether that be, as in our case, the general public voting, or it be about a party and a set of institutions. And I think that means that when we think about politics, we have to think about policy, obviously, and we have to think about our leaders and how we choose them, but we also have to think about ourselves. I hope that doesn't sound sanctimonious, because I'm sure that many of you are doing much more than myself, but we have to sort of think about the responsibilities we have. I think that all sort of shows how individuals, as much as leaders, play their part.
Britain, where the Labour Party has been transformed, at least on the level of its membership and its leader, from what it was into something very different, which has given people some hope again. I mean, when Corbyn stands up and says things, most of these things are traditional social democratic policies. And the attack is way out of proportion. Renationalize the railways. Between 65 and 70% of the British population wants that. Take some of the utilities back as soon as you can. For instance, water, electricity, gas, over 50% in favor of that. And yet this proportion is never, ever reflected in what is written on the media or on the propaganda networks of the state. I mean, the British press calmly refers to Russia today as Putin's propaganda station, which it is. But the BBC should be referred to in those terms as well. It is a propaganda station for the dominant ideology of those who rule. And it has virtually abandoned any critical analysis of what is going on, which once upon a time it used to do. Same can be said for the bulk of the mainstream media. So in this situation, for Corbyn to even exist is quite amazing, and why it appears more radical than it actually is. Because nothing he has said, apart from on foreign policy, is new. It's a continuation of Attlee and Wilson.
That's true, but he's not really got in trouble for wanting to renationalise the railways. It is this foreign policy element that we've seen this massive debate over the summer over the attitude towards Israel and the anti-Semitism issue. What's your take on that?
My take on that is this, that after the Second Intifada, the Israeli embassies, under the direction of the Israeli Foreign Office, were told, start labeling opponents to Israel and our policies as anti-Semitic all over the globe. Well, in some cases they had more success than others, and in Britain they had had no success on this, very little, because most of the English Jewish organizations weren't politicized as that. But recently, with Corbyn, you see behind this, I mean, in terms of actual anti-Semitic practices in Britain, it has the lowest record of incidents reported out of the whole of Europe, by the way. Very low proportion. So you have a tiny group of Jewish organizations opposed by other Jews organizations, Jews for Peace, Jews for Labour, who support Corbyn and have said that. But the publicity and the campaign that is created is based largely, not exclusively, on conservative Jews, with the backing of the right wing inside the Parliamentary Labour Party. This is what's going on. Because there is a layer of people within the Parliamentary Labour Party who would rather Labour lost than Corbyn won. And they think like that, 60 or 70 of his own MPs. And they've been backing this campaign, as if suddenly anti-Semitism is ready. What's the reason for that is that Corbyn has had a very even-handed and justified position on Palestine, saying that what is happening in Palestine is unacceptable, which is the position also, I would say, about 50% of Jews in this country, and an increasing number of them in the United States, especially the younger generation, who don't want to justify what is being done to the Palestinians.
To me, I suppose, looking at the idea of good leadership, it inevitably comes with reasonable policies that come from the people they aim to serve, or at least it should come from the people they aim to serve. My concern at the moment, aside from all of the horrors that you have just outlined in global leadership, is the idea of strength. I mean, for a start off, it's an incredibly masculine idea of strength. I don't recognise Trump to be a strong man, to be perfectly honest. I recognise him to be weak-willed, easily led. And I actually just think his policy is made up by the last person he spoke to that day. That's
last
how
man who sat on him.
Yeah, that's it. It's just like, if you leave the room last, you're the one who's got the ideas. That's the next executive order. So I think that the idea of strength is often just about masculine strength, and I don't particularly think that that is good leadership. The idea that we should vote for policies. Now, I suppose people also describe me as being a centrist. I am not a centrist. I am far more left-wing than that, and also that I'm a moderate. I am not a moderate, I am a radical in actual fact. It is how I like to view myself. But the idea, the sort of centrist idea, and the Macron sort of style of leadership, or I was about to say Louis Theroux. That's not his name. What's his name in Canada? That's it, Trudeau. Anyway, forgot his name.
Well, Louis Theroux might think about it.
I've got his face in my head. Worry not. And the rest of him. But that idea that you are gaining your insight from the people that you serve is a style of leadership that I think is, to me, much, much more appealing, although I think largely is as false as the strength. I don't think that people just want to vote for policies, however. I don't think, in fact, I knocked 21,000 doors during the last snap general election, and I met one person who'd read any manifesto. Didn't meet a single person who actually knew anything other than the headline policies of free university fees for everybody from the Labour Party and charging you to die from the Conservative Party, which admittedly did fall down on one side in favour, hence my majority. However...
So maybe you don't want them to know anymore.
Yeah, the idea that people sit and think about policy is for the birds, in my experience of my constituents. Actually, personality genuinely matters much, much more to the general public than we give credit for. And therefore, I think that really, actually, I don't seek a world where policy is the thing that everybody cares about.
Okay.
I just want to see a world where the people who people follow aren't so batshit crazy.
This is the honest immigration debate that we have got to have. And the problem is, at the moment, we're not having it. And we actually have never had it. And so we've now gone from the extreme of, we're not going to have a debate about it because it's quite an uncomfortable one, because you'll be accused of calling me a racist if I challenge you for your views. To the other one, we've gone to the other extreme now, where people like me who make the point that in a city like Nottingham, where the referendum result was declared by Ward, very effective Labour Party in Nottingham, very sensibly declared it by Ward. You know the demographics of the ward. You can see exactly, without doing too much stereotyping, how people voted. So where were the biggest Leave votes in Nottingham? White working class areas. When I pointed that out, apparently that makes me a racist. I mean, the world has gone, or our world in this country has gone completely
Well, I don't think
where
that
you can't have a debate. So do forgive me, and then I'll shut up. The problem is this, right? So someone like me, I have no problem when a constituent comes up to me and says, we've got too many immigrants in Broxtowe, Anna. I'll go, really? Where? Where are they? Because, of course, there aren't any. So then I get, well, they're coming, really. Well, if they're coming, these are genuine conversations. They're coming here to work. Then it comes out, we've got too many Muslims. Do you want, you don't want to laugh or cry, you don't really know, because what you do know is that that is not a proper debate. And the problem at the left, too much at the moment, and I see this in some of Angela's colleagues, and this is not a tribal criticism of Labour, I understand, but when now people come up to a Labour MP and they'll say, we've got too many immigrants, so they, instead of challenging it, having the debate, they'll say, I know, I feel your pain, we got a problem here, because they're suppressing wages, which is bollocks. It's not true. And so we're lacking again the debate, because people now don't want to challenge, frankly, some racist views that because of the referendum, people think it's acceptable to say stuff.
So, Abdullah Öcalan, not only was he the thinker behind this paradigm, but also spent 15 years in Syria talking to the communities and the society every day and trying to understand them. So that is potentially one of the biggest differences between what's happening in northern Syria right now and many other revolutionary instances that in history, is that it's not a vanguardist movement or a revolution that says, okay, we're here now and this is the way we want you to live. It's built in a way that it's completely embedded within its community and within its society, and therefore that's why the most ground level of society, the communes, are the where all the decisions for society get made. And I spoke to the Arab co-chair of the assembly. His name was Farouk, and I said to him, why are you part of this? He used to be an Arab tribal leader, and somewhere like, the Middle East, if you're a tribal leader, the world is your oyster, really. So, especially in that region. And I said to him, so, why are you here? And he said, I was one of the first to uprise against Assad, and then I experienced the siege of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and then I assisted in the liberation. And so he said, when we first liberated this place, our motto was education before bread. And, I felt like I wanted to be a part of this revolution because it's not just for the Kurdish people or anyone else, but for the whole region and maybe even the world. And so when I told him I'd do some organizing with Kurdish students, he said to me, why are you just organizing Kurdish students? You should be organizing Arab students too. So I said, okay, so what's your message to them? He said, but actually, I don't have a message just for Arabs. I have a message for the whole of humanity. And that's, he did criticize the complicity and complacency of many of the Arab states in the region, especially, in the fight against ISIS. But he said, my message is to humanity, and that's to support this revolution and to recognize what we're trying to build here. And, even though when you kind of like go through Minbij, you kind of still feel some tension because people are still really quite scared that, they've more or less just been liberated from ISIS, that something else might come. So I asked them, what do you think is the biggest risk right now against what you're trying to do here? And every single person I asked, without a shadow of a doubt, said it's the attacks by the Turkish state. And so it made me think, why do international powers, one, not recognize the threat of the Turkish state? Why would people want to destroy a society that's built on democracy, ecology, and gender equality? Isn't that why why a lot of the time in the West we start wars against countries in the first place? So-called like bomb them to democracy. Like that's usually the policy, or whatever the rationale behind it. And so I realized that any kind of autonomy of any people at ground level, that it's not by a central authoritarian government, means that the interests of whether it's international powers or international local powers won't work in the way it has for especially the past 100 years. So that's when I realized, I really had no clue what struggle was until I met these people. We kind of like speak about these things in an abstract way all the time, and struggle, revolution, resistance. But when you see that in those conditions, despite those conditions, that people are still not motivated by fear or hate, but rather by the hope that they can be active actors in transforming where they are, but maybe even having an impact on the whole world.
The democracy that we enjoy, the very limited democracy that we enjoy in the advanced capitalist societies, and political scientists of every ideological stripe agree with this, cannot be understood apart from the formation of organizations of the unpropertied who demanded that they be included in the state despite being unpropertied. The form of elected representation we had before Jacksonian democracy in the United States, first of all,
Actually, I don't want any history because you only got 3 minutes.
Well, no,
so if you were Jeremy Corbyn, what would you do?
Well,
That's
I think this is related
to
it. It was the development of labor movements and the development of feminist movements after that, supported usually by these labor movements, arguing that the unpropertied or human beings were considered the properties of the men in their family, should be able to be members of the state. And the democracy we have, which is a real valued and important thing, was won by those struggles. It didn't come out of an abstract model. It didn't come out of the beneficence of the old state ruling class. It was won everywhere, and this is entirely agreed in political science. There was a great deal of socialist yearning often associated with this, but not for the most part. That socialist yearning, that yearning for collective protection, collective expression, an attempt to democratize our society, to democratize the enterprise, to allow what happens on the hospital ward to be a matter of discourse and discussion of a democratic kind, to allow what happens in the mine to be that, was what people were also seeking for. That has not been achieved. That has not been achieved.
Well, we have a free national health service here, which is free.
This is not what I taught. I was speaking of the democratic aspiration. What we have is a society in which the decisions about what is to be produced, where it's to be produced, what's to be invested, how it's to be invested, is not determined by states. It is determined by the massive corporations that control the economies. They do so, of course, in close conjunction with the states that protect their property, that codify the rules of exchange around the world.
So you've got 1 minute to tell us what you would do as Prime Minister.
We have a bit of important democracy, but we have a yearning, which Corbyn expresses, for a much broader, a much deeper democratic economy, democratic society.
So
that's what socialism means.
What does it actually involve? What do you do?
Well, if you read the Labour Manifesto, it begins with developing the co-op system, providing an infrastructure through regional investment banks. In my view, eventually, although this would meet enormous opposition, not only from the City of London, but I fear from parts of the British state, which are the repressive apparatus of the state, to turn what we all need so badly and are now so stuck into, to turn the City of London into a public utility. This is what all of our resources pass through. Right? And without access to that, we can't democratically decide what should be produced, how it should be produced, whether the NHS should be marketized, which is what's happened to it.
To watch all the full talks and debates from these highlights, find the links below in the description and subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas.